So the 444 is in the pit lane with damage to the right rear.
Norbert Fischer, Christian Kronert and Daniel Sils, the drivers of that car, running in V5 rather than the Porsche Cup class car.
638 is the VW Jetta that I mentioned earlier on, resplendent in fabulous late 80s, early 90s dark maroon with yellow flames on the front and slightly contrasting trim.
I've got a feeling there was a yeah, here we are. There was a news article about this car earlier in the week on the VLN website, and it will load eventually. And certainly a very standard-looking Volkswagen Jetta. It is the K3 just coming into Tiergarten now, the Kramer Racing Porsche.
It is a Jetta 16 valve, two-door variant of that, which we never got over here, for the ADAC Niedersachsen team, and that's for Manuel Kraskia, Christian Albinger, Jürgen and Ulrich, Jürgen Schmidt and Ulrich Schmidt. Slightly different spellings there by the last two drivers. The K3 I like a lot, and as I said, it's got Wolfgang Kaufmann at the wheel of that car.
The Volkswagen Jetta, built in 1989.
Told you it was late 80s, early 90s maroon, didn't I?
And it was bought through eBay.
Of course it was.
They've been racing it in the RCN series, which is the kind of little brother series to the VLN, and they did have a race last year in the VLN, and they want to do 3 races in the remaining part of this year and see how they get on.
What class is that in then? I've just looked it up, you know, and I forgot to notice it when I looked at its entry. It should be in 4.
Apparently they're all fairly weighty gentleman drivers of
Good
it.
for them.
So the article tells us, weighing around about 18 stone each, they say.
Wow, that's even 2 stone heavier than me now.
It's in H2.
Yes.
The objective is to finish in the top half of the class positions at the end of the race.
Good for them.
The fat boys in the exotic car, they call themselves.
In the less than exotic car.
Something like that.
It does prove, though, Paul, doesn't it? Whilst, you know, we are, and people will forgive us, I'm sure, for concentrating on the exotica that is at the front of the field, the GT3. It does prove that you can still, on a reasonably sensible budget, go out and have a lot of fun on a Saturday morning for 6 hours between, you know, 3 or 4 of you, from a car that you haven't necessarily had to pay too much money for. You know, somebody that we know, Rich Bernard, is selling, he's just upgraded his race car. He's selling a very lovely early Porsche Boxster with a hard top and a cage, which is fully prepped, for 17.5, 18 grand on a trailer, which, all right, that's not pocket change, but that's instead of buying a new car, isn't it, for most people? And if you don't buy, if like me, you don't have new cars, you have old cars. Both of my cars are 20-year-old plus now. And, you know, that's the sort of thing that you think, well, instead of buying a little hatchback to run around, you buy yourself a racing car, find somewhere to keep it, it's on a trailer, and you could come and do this with your mates for not a lot of money, and providing you don't bend it too often, it's not going to cost you a lot of money.
No, absolutely, and I'm just trying to recall the team that came to the VLN 4 round, British team from the nether reaches of Scotland, who drove all the way down to the Nürburgring, raced their BMW, and we got a mention of it as well, because they were being overtaken in the closing stages of the race. And tremendous set of enthusiasts. Guy did the 4-hour race on his own. Never mind about a 3-hour limit. Well, you can do the 4-hour race on your own. Can't do the 6 hours on your own, but a maximum driving limit of 3.5 hours. But they brought it down. There was, I think, 3 of them, or maybe 2 of them, learnt the whole process of the VLN. They weren't allowed to go to scrutineering until they had a garage sticker. They weren't allowed a garage sticker until they got themselves into a garage. The process of getting into the garage is either buying yourself a VLN season pass for the garage, which of course they hadn't got because VLN 4 was the first one they'd done. So they had to go around and beg a space in the back of one of the garages that wasn't quite so full. Met up with the guys from Miltech Motorsport, got into their garage, got their garage badge, then were able to go and get scrutineered. And between the 3 of them, they had a great race, got to the end of the race, and they're going to do another VLN before the end of the season, they've told me. So look forward to seeing that BMW back in the VLN. But the Jetta in a very similar kind of mould, and if you can't do tourist rides, then why not get yourself a Volkswagen Jetta and go racing?
Well, the amount of people, of course, around the Nürburgring, if you lived anywhere near the Nürburgring, you would have a ring car, you'd have a ring special, and you would certainly do that.
That Mini Traveller with a Mini Cooper Traveller, I saw someone preparing recently.
Matt Guest has just tweeted, who is, of course, the brilliantly named Stiffy Van Doormere. And for those of you who don't know, the reason that we talk about Stiffy Van Doormere is if you put Stoffel Van Doorn into spell check, that's what it comes up as. It says, do you think the previous owner has any idea what became of their little Jetta? Probably not. Very good. So the leaders coming back across the start-finish line now and into the pit lane for Renger van der Zande at the end of lap number 9.
No, that's not scheduled because he only came in at the end of lap number 7. So I can't see no other reason than that being a problem for the guy who led the first lap in part, didn't lead across the line, the Haribo Mercedes, but it was certainly it's been in either first or second throughout the race, now in the pits, and Frank Stippler therefore takes over either in the lead of the race or did the 62 Porsche stay.
No, I can only imagine that they were passed because they were so close.
Yeah.
We'll see in a moment when it updates. I believe that Stippler, if it is still, I don't think he's handed over to, it's Peter Terting, isn't it, that he's sharing with in the 15. I think Frank's still in the car. So that then is a new leader for Phoenix Rating. One of the locally based teams. They have their headquarters on Gottlieb Daimlerstrasse, which is on the road that runs alongside the road that runs alongside the Donniger Höhe. And it is where many of the tyre manufacturers and motor manufacturers have their technical centres. So that means then that Martin Ragginger, if he stays out, should come through in second. Here's the number 3 BMW, fault of BMW coming through, which I think is still Alex Imperatori behind the wheel. Dark helmet with the red chin piece. He's on the Grand Prix circuit now and confirmed Stippler has gone through, having completed 9 laps leading. Well, does that mean the 3 BMWs up into second then? Could well do at the end of the 9th lap.
The number 3 Imperatori and Jörg Müller car. I think that probably is Jörg Müller now.
Oh, do you? Right.
I think we saw him in the garage getting
the
ready.
Giga Speed cars come into the pit lane, the 62. That was the leader in... Well, it led the race, but it was leading the SP7 category from the 77 car. That was a very quick pit stop for those guys.
And the reason why Van der Zande came into the pits, or that the Haribo Mercedes number 8 came into the pits, was for a stop-and-go penalty. Now, I can only assume, I suppose it could have been for a yellow flag stop-and-go infringement, but more likely perhaps that the pit stop was a little bit too short.
Good call.
Because we did see it come out in the lead, and I was expressing surprise that they've got themselves, the Haribo car got itself out ahead of the Phoenix Audi. So that car has now made its second pit stop, but that was stop and go.
Second, by the way, but now inside the top 10. Second in SP7 is the 77 rented to drive Familia Racing Porsche Cup car. This is a Manthey Racing breathed on Cup car, so it'll be very good around here. Christian Menzel and Dmitry Lukovnikov, excuse me. Sorry, Dmitry. That is in second position. The Strycek family car, the 355 car. This is the Opel Astra, one of the new Astra. Now, they debuted an Astra DR car not so very long ago, but I don't think that's it. I think that's just the Cup car, if I'm not mistaken. And that is the 3 Stryceks in there. Volker Strycek. Yes, it is. It's an OPC Cup car, of which there are 2 here in Cup 1. And in fact, this weekend, it's only Lena Strycek and Volker. Volker, the name that you will recognise for 2 reasons. 1, because he used to be the head of the Opel Performance Centre, OPC. And 2, because he is inextricably linked with the Manta Foxtail car.
The 62 car did as we suggested it would, John, make its pit stop, as did the 77. So the 2 SP7 cars that were rising up through the order have now made their pit stops and are therefore falling back down through the order. Kramer
K3 is in. Thank you for 90 years of racing on the Nordschleifer. Is that what that said on the back of there?
Something like that, yes. 1926, I think it's 26, but it may be 1927. 26 they built it, 27 it was finished. Quite sure that Manfred and Erwin Kramer were racing on it in there, so it may have been an earlier Kramer who was running on it.
It's a good job they've never raced against each other, because that obviously would have been Kramer versus Kramer.
Yes.
Johannes Guaglica tells me that the stop-go for the Haribo was indeed, as we surmised, for a pit stop penalty. So in and out for that car. Through comes the 54 GT4 Mercedes-Benz. First time I'm getting to see that racing. A very handsome car it is too. I do like the GT4 idea with the smaller rear wing. It looks far more like a road car. Now, all right, grant with race car stickers on it, and a very lovely, almost classic silver arrows grey to it with the white stripes, white being the original racing colour of Germany, of course. And I think that is a very handsome car.
And the rear wing, as a GT4 car, has this curve to it as well, which, having discussed with manufacturer of another GT4 class car, actually aerodynamically is not as efficient. If you want to make a wing more efficient, you actually bend it the other way. So by curving it the way they have curved it, it actually aerodynamically makes it less effective than even a straight wing would be. But it does have the kind of artistic, aesthetic merit to it.
Yeah, and it does give it that more sort of breathed-on road car appearance rather than a full race car, which of course is exactly what GT4 is meant to be about. The KTM Crossbow sitting leading its Cup X or Cup Cross class. I think Cup Cross is much better. Now this, of course, is a development of the open top car, and it has this extraordinary Bond bug style canopy that lifts up and out to get in and out, and hasn't quite taken off as yet, but there's a part of me that wants that car to take off, Paul, because it is just something different.
No, you don't want it to take off.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Terrible use of language around it. There is a part of me that wants that car to be successful and sell in numbers, because it is something different.
Absolutely, and even if it doesn't as a road car, because it is a bit quirky as a road car, I think, but as a racing series for the Crossbow, if they could make the Crossbow Cup work as a racing series, a grid full of those, I think would be very spectacular viewing indeed. Battle is on for, what is that, third place between Martin Ragginger in the number 4 Falcon Porsche and 911 Manthey Porsche, the two Porsches nose to tail as they came onto the Döttinger Höhe and underneath the bridge and then into the Tiergarten chicane. As the cars coming through, this time to complete 10 laps, and still Frank Stippler leads the way in the Phoenix Audi from, actually it will be second place, isn't it? The two Porsches in second and third places, with the recovering Mercedes having had it stop and go on the previous lap. Screen following the TCR battle, one of which has its windscreen wipers on as they come down into turn 1.
Good spot.
Now that's the 818 Civic, which still has its windscreen wipers on. Now whether he's just hit the switch and can't switch them off, or whether it is actually raining, I haven't seen anybody else with windscreen wipers on.
Yeah, just got by one of the... No, it's raining, Paul. It is raining. Not heavily yet, but the tarmac on the Grand Prix circuit has changed colour. And now, this is the time, of course, when everyone in the pit lane and just going through. Yeah, definitely raining. The Manthey car has its wiper on. The Porsche, that is the number 911 Porsche, and the 4 Falcon Porsche. And it's great to see a Porsche again in Falcon colours. I got used to that, of course, in the ALMS in America. Great to see it back in those colours this year, and the BMW looks well in it as well. It has rapidly become a classic livery, that teal blue and almost French blue, isn't it? Colour scheme of Falcon tyres. Yes, definitely raining. Norbert Seidler has his wipers on as well. The Lexus ISF CCS-R, for those of you who are keeping a note on these things, is the blue and matte black bonneted car. This is the 136, and that car looks very good in its limited specification as well. You see, it's not a road car with that aerofoil mounted on more race car style wings and up higher at the back, sort of touring car style.
The race leaders then having gone through already, completing their 10th lap. The gap has gone up more than somewhat between Frank Stippler, of course, and the Porsche battle for second place. 12 seconds is the gap between the Audi and the two Porsches. Still waiting on the screen for the gap to come up back to Van der Zande, who, if he is still at the wheel of the Haribo Mercedes, having taken that penalty, will be shown now coming up, in 18 seconds further behind the two Porsches, but still in 4th place, and is comfortably ahead of the number 3 Falcon Motorsports Porsche, which is in 5th place. Alex Imperatori is 40 seconds now behind in 5th place. Hubert Haupt with the number 7 Black Falcon Mercedes in 6th. And then it's Norbert Seidler and Claudio Hucken in the two Porsches, 31 and 20, in 7th and 8th places, the next two up. So with track getting a little bit damp around the regions, it's, as John was saying a moment ago, certainly by no means raining heavily, but just an awkward drizzle, which in a sense, doesn't make it worth going on to wet weather tyres, but it does mean you've got to be that little bit more cautious, particularly when overtaking the slower traffic, because that's when you have to go off the line.
Correct.
That's where the little bits of rubbish tend to lie, the bits of tyres and things that tend to lie, and that's where it is anywhere a little bit more slippery, and you do have to go off the job.
Yes, and him out there just having to pass a couple of slower cars, one of which is passing another slower car, and that's when it gets dangerous, when you're 2 or 3 wide, and the guy on the inside, who's maybe the least experienced of the drivers in the slowest car, just a bit wiggly. And then the guy outside has to go a bit wider, and maybe he loses it a bit, and the bloke in the number 7 Mercedes AMG GT3 Black Volta Mercedes, who's sitting in the top 10, who's Hubert Hout, he's the guy who's on the outside who gets a tiny little touch, and then he can end up in the barrier. And it's nobody's fault, it's just happened.
And it is why, when you're driving the Nürburgring, and why the regulations are now so strict about doing these VLN races before you get your license to do the Nürburgring 24, is because you have to get used to leaving that cushion. You have to get used to leaving that extra margin so that you can use it if you need to. And a lot of the top drivers who come out of other forms of racing where they're used to pushing at 100% all the time have to get used to leaving that little bit of a cushion, because they're going to need it. Otherwise, as you say, John, they're going to be right on the limit all the time, which they're used to doing in their single-seater career or in their LMP2 driving career or whatever it is, and then they suddenly find when they need the little margin, it's not there to use.
I remember talking to Klaus Graf one of the very first times that I went to the Nürburgring Nordschleife to drive it, and I was fortunate enough to be on a manufacturer day with Aston Martin, and there were very few cars out there, and it was Chris Porritt, who was then the Aston Martin test and development driver, who gave me my first laps around and taught me what to look for as into the pits comes. I was at the 30 or the 31 for a Delhi car. I'll tell you that in just a second. And I've got half a chance of finishing my story before something else happens. It is the 30. Yes, it is.
It's the one that was damaged delayed on the first light.
Correct, the delayed Fricka Delhi car, and Sabina Schmitz gets in, replacing blue and white helmet of Klaus Abelin. And I remember having done my first few laps unaccompanied, I come back wide-eyed, of course, as you might imagine, and Klaus looking at me and saying, "How was that?" and told him, and started to ask me about a few things. And he said, "You've probably gone closer to the limit there than you would do if you were racing." And I went, "I'm pretty certain I haven't." And he said, "Well, there's so few cars out there." He says, "We drive it in those days, it's changing now, but you have to have something in hand, because you can come over the top of a blind brow and there'll be a car in the middle of the road, because that's what happens. And it wasn't there 5 minutes ago, 5 seconds ago, never mind the last time you came around." And it was very, very interesting to talk to guys who have a lot of laps. That margin for error is being dialed out that Paul was describing rather a moment or two ago, with the GT3 cars that are so quick, with the fact that the surface has been improved down through the years, and so a lot of the imperfections there are not eliminated but mitigated. So you run the car closer to the ground. It's more like a very long racetrack than it's ever been, and people are driving it like that. And the GT3 cars are honestly too fast around there now. They are too fast around the Nordschleife for my money. And when Hans Stuck said to me a few years ago, "This is as fast as we ever need to go, and we're now 25, 30 seconds a lap quicker than that," you know, that's what you've got to think of.
I think it's a valid point, but going back to driving mentality, driver culture, if you will, I think perhaps that's where there is benefit in these. I mean, we get the Nürburgring specialists who have been round in a race many times. They've not just done the tourist laps, they've not just done demonstration laps, but they've been involved in racing situations, and they've seen what happens when you come up behind a damaged car, or you recognize how a car is being driven by another driver when he doesn't quite feel as familiar, so you give that car a little bit more of a little bit wider berth perhaps as you overtake it. I don't think there's anything that can substitute for driver experience.
Agreed.
And their margin, if you will, is that much smaller, not because they are pushing the limit harder, it's because they are able to react and make the right decision more often, and so they're less likely to have the accident in that unexpected situation that you've described. And I think that's where the benefit of experience is just invaluable and can't be overstated.
Well, also, you know that in a tricky situation, which part of the circuit you can use, you can't use. I don't want to use that bit of the curve every lap, but if I need to, I know I can drive over it there. That's the sort of thing that you only get to know on any circuit with lots of laps. And getting lots of laps around the Nordschleife is difficult because of how much time it takes. It's a simple time and arithmetic thing.
You become an old man driving a lot of laps around the hill.
Or an old, yes, or an older lady, yes, indeed.
You were lucky in that you had somebody teaching you when you first drove around it.
Well, my first lap was done in a hire car, of course it was. It was in a Ford Mondeo estate, and I looked at the sat-nav that I'd taken with me, which I stuck up on the windscreen next to the rear view mirror, because I knew I'd be looking in the rear view mirror a lot. Zoomed it in as far as I could, so that at least I could see which way the next corner went. And I did 2 laps before on the evening, on tourist laps, before I went out in an Aston Martin the next day with Chris Borrett. Chris took me round. It's funny, isn't it, when you go around with somebody like that. I remember pulling out the pit lip, just using the Nordschleife, and Chris driving out onto the Hatzenbach, and me thinking, oh, he's trying too hard here. Was he trying to impress me? He's going to fall off. He's going to. This is ridiculous. This is absurd. And by the time that I was doing my second lap, thinking, come on, this has got to be going quicker. You've got to go quicker than this. Everything just seems so close to you when you start off, because it's not like a normal racing track. It is, if you like, the ultimate country road. You're racing from town to town. Hopefully there's nothing coming in the other direction. And it is far more of a mix of rally driving and racing skills than it is pure racing skills, because you really don't know how much grip you're going to get at every corner, because it was 10 minutes since you were last there. It changes that much, or it can change that much. 10 laps down, by the way, and we're coming to the, we've gone through the completion of another half an hour's racing. It is still the 15 Audi Phoenix Racing that leads by 12.5 seconds from the number 4 Porsche. That's the Portland Porsche in second. The 911 Magpie Racing Porsche is in third.
But for how much longer, I'm not sure, because they were very close together as they came through at the end of the last lap. I've been looking out for some onboards, perhaps from the Haribo car, where I know we do have an onboard shot. But I don't think the Haribo car is close enough to show us the battle that's going on between the 2 Porsches. So we've not been seeing that one, unfortunately. But that is very close indeed. And whether it's Romain Dumas still behind the wheel of the 911, the 911 having the luxury of 3 drivers, Kevin Estre and Mathieu Jaminet being the other 2, whereas the Falcon car just has Klaus Bachler and Martin Ragginger. So I would suspect that Ragginger has stayed in the Falcon car, number 4, but not sure whether 911 will still have Romain Dumas, whether they might have put Kevin Estre into that car.
Yeah, I think it would be Bachler on the rotation if Ragginger did get out.
Well, yes, because Bachler is the only driver, that's the point. There's only a 2-driver car, the Falcon car.
So behind them, Van der Zande, having served, if it is still Renger in the car, in the Haribo AMG GT, Imperatori in the number 3 BMW, then the 7 Hubert Haupt. These are all SP9 cars. In fact, it's SP9 all the way down to 11th position. Now that's interesting, because that is the rent-a-drive car now shown as leading SP7. And the Kraling 62 Gigaspeed car has dropped half a minute behind, having gone longer and led the race overall. Now it's in 12th position and second in SP7.
Yeah, it was a much longer pit stop for the 62 car. Not quite sure why that might have been. Or maybe it wasn't. I think it was on the pit stop where he lost the ground. There wasn't a lot to choose between them, even though there were several places. The 77, though, as you rightly say, John, having got the jump during the pit stop interval.
Wonderfully described on the ticker of the weather conditions at the moment as easy-going rain on the Grand Prix circuit. Gentle rain. It is wet enough to have the windscreen wipers on, though, at that point. And this is where the professional drivers earn their money and the amateur drivers either love it or hate it. There's no in-between here. Now, I love driving in the rain, and even if I'm not quite on the right tyres, I still love it. In fact, I quite like that even more because it is more of a challenge. And I am not a very fast driver, so in these conditions is when I don't mind the car moving around underneath me.
It's going a little bit heavier, I think, and it's also not just on the Grand Prix loop, but also parts of the Nordschleife are also affected by the rain now as well, John. So not only are slow zones going to impact lap times, but also weather conditions. Still
very nasty on the Hatzenbach.
Yes, the forecast still suggests that it will be dry for the remainder of the race, but that part of the forecast I think we can't quite rely on as well as we could. The change has now happened for second place because whether it's Kevin Estre or still Romain Dumas, I don't know, but the Manthey Porsche in any event 911 Manthey car has gone ahead of the Falcon sponsored car, so 911 up into second place. Martin Ragginger, I'm pretty sure, still at the wheel of the number 4 Falcon car, back to third.
Very heavy rain on the end of the Hatzenbach, and the number 101 Gigaspeed Porsche struggling massively, trying to get the power down there. I didn't see any slow zone there, but the slippery surface flags are out all the way up towards the Flugplatz. And a tweak on the, what I'm sure is the traction control there. You need it turned up to the max here, I would have thought. And it's getting drier from Flugplatz or Schwedenkreuz. Just trying to look at the marshal's post and see if the slippery surface flags are still out. No. So it's Arenberg, the long right-hander, now very much smoother than it used to be, under the Yokohama Bridge and down into the foxhole. Now the foxhole, being under the trees, holds the water longer but stays drier longer as well. If there's a little bit of a breeze, it tends to just stop the water from lying there. There was a BMW behind the barrier on the driver's left there as the Gigaspeed Porsche went through. Leader coming through to complete lap 12, Paul, with 4 hours and 13 to go, and it is the blue and white of Phoenix Racing. And Romain Dumas is on the start-finish straight as the Golf TCR number 802 has had a very big accident indeed. Both ends of the car wiped off.
Just coming into the Tiergarten chicane, isn't it? And
that's hit both
very
sides.
Often where you get a sideways, side-to-side contact as they come through that last bit of the Dottinger Höhe, the Antoniusbucher, underneath the bridge. And I think that's where they've had side-to-side contact, I would suspect, unless something's broken on the car. But it does mean there's yellow flags towards the end of the Dottinger Höhe,
which is holding up the runners that are now behind the leaders. And the leaders got through, Stibler and Dumas got through before that, and yellow flags are being waved before the bridge, that left-hand kink, which you barely even turn your hands for. You just let your eyes drift to the apex and then to the furthest point down the road that you can see, and somehow
the car turns
the car turns itself. That's exactly what you do. You don't think about turning the car at that point. You're going so quickly.
It's either Michael Patz or Konstantin Kleckser, the two drivers of the Golf in the TCR class. It's not the only Golf, the 804, no, it was the 804, wasn't it? Yes, yeah. Matilda Racing car. There is another Matilda Racing Golf which is still in the race, but that's going to be I think a fairly lengthy delay, John, whilst the rescue units get to it, and I suspect there's also going to be barrier repair work that needs doing.
Certainly on driver's left, Paul, because it looks like it's gone in there at a fairly acute angle and then bounced out to the other side of the road, and it's actually parked in the middle of the road at the moment with the front of the car to driver's right. There's just about enough room to get round behind it, and great flagging work by the marshals, as ever, doing a smashing job. Live coverage in sound and vision of VLN 5 from the Nordschleife on a damp afternoon in Germany, and with just over 4 hours and 11 minutes still to run, Frank Stippler had already started his 13th lap. This happened behind him. Dumas went through in second, or at least should I say the 15 Audi went through in the lead. The 911 Porsche went through in second. I'm still reading the drivers from the screen, but we don't always get the correct driver names on there. The 4 Porsche, the Falcon Porsche in third. Renger van der Zande started the number 8 Haribo car, and that's gone through in 4th position, some 50 seconds back. It should be the 3 BMW, the Falcon BMW, that goes through next. I haven't seen that car, but then again, that doesn't mean that it's had a problem. And just as we've got the slow zone at Ruhr Act for barrier repairs from that Cayman going in hard earlier on removed, this incident at Tiergarten will slow things down again. Frank Stippler will be coming upon that fairly shortly, as out goes the Porsche number 120. Van Zande is in the foxhole, just coming out of the foxhole towards the top, that S's, tricky S's, down one gear, down another gear, down a third gear for the last part of it, and it's very dark in the distance. Looks to be rain in the air. Clear track ahead of Van der Zande as he comes into the left-hander at Metzgerfeld uphill. Mountain bike route off to the right-hand side there. Some, what is he, 6 kilometres, 7 kilometres into the lap now. 8 kilometres actually as you go around Kallenhardt and start going downhill. All about rhythm, as so much of this circuit is. 1, 2, 3 right-handers before you go 4th right kink, and then down the gearbox into the siphon. Short shift up through the right-handed exit, and again you're plunging downhill there towards Breitscheid and the bridge. Cars coming at speed onto the finish line. I can't believe they've got that Golf moved that quickly.
Well, it may be that if the contact was at a slightly shallower angle than we thought it was. I mean, we only saw the wheel tracks from the angle after the contact, so it might have been a shallow approach, in which case the barriers might not be replacing. But you're right.
It's a fair point.
Did seem to have switched back to green flag racing straight away.
The approach to green flag, to yellow flags here, is something I would like to see more in other forms of motor racing. We've discussed this before as well, and I had a chat with a very well experienced racing driver at Spa Classic a few weeks ago now about the attitudes to yellow flags, and he was very much of the opinion as the current crop of racing drivers don't respect them enough. And his quote to me was, we could get rid of all these silly slow zones and virtual safety cars and everything else, and all the time that takes out of racing, if people would just respect double waved yellows more. And at that point I frankly wanted to give him a hug. I may have, in fact, I may have to admit to that. It was a very manly hug though, and he represents the drivers on a number of FIA boards, and stewards at the very highest level. Here, it does seem to be something that the drivers take to heart, and the penalties for not doing so, though, Paul, are fairly punitive, and you can lose your permit.
Well, yes, that's true, and certainly from talking to drivers, the reasons that they give why they observe the yellow flags at the Nürburgring are never, when they've been speaking to me off the record, they're never saying, oh, I was concerned for the marshal's safety, or I was concerned for the driver's safety. It's always, we'll get hit with a massive penalty. So it's a bit like...
There's your answer.
It's a bit like, yeah. So I think the point you make is right, that you have to instill in drivers the importance of observing the yellow flags. I think what the Nürburgring does very well is to apply the penalties consistently so that the drivers know if they're going to get hit or not, whereas in some other categories, sometimes you get hit, sometimes you don't. But I think the other thing is that there's a certain old-fashionedness about driving at the Nürburgring where people do it for fun. The drivers who are driving here, yes, they want to win and yes, they want to be competitive, but even if they're professional drivers, they'll do it because they enjoy driving around the Nürburgring. You know, they can probably make enough money doing other racing, whereas other places, in order to pay the mortgage and pay the bills and do all the things that racing drivers have to pay for. But they actually race at the Nürburgring for fun, and because it's a huge pleasure kick to do, and in that sense it's a very old-fashioned type of racing. Leaders are coming through to complete 13 laps whilst that VW Golf is being towed to a place of safety, so we've still got the slow zone in place at the Tiergarten chicane there, John.
And it's destroyed on the left front.
But what is interesting is that Kevin Estre, for I'm convinced it is no longer Romain Dumas, is at the wheel of the 911 and is right on Frank Stippler's tail as they came through, so hopefully we'll get some shots of that once they're clear of the yellow flags. So, thank you, TV directions, bang on the ball, but good for him. So Frank Stippler has, I'll say Kevin Estre, it is a guess, but he's going extremely well, Kevin Estre, in the 911 car, that Manthey Racing Porsche, right on the tail of the Audi, and they're having a great battle around the Grand Prix loop at the moment. Look how much the Porsche closes up under braking, and a very different line taken by the Porsche as it goes through the Grand Prix loop there, John.
And a thing to note, of course, with all the chat about the new Porsche RSR, this is a more traditional 911 with the engine hanging out over the back wheels. This is not a mid-engine car, this is a GT3 spec car. Now that's difficult with Porsche because everything's got GT3 in it, but this is a much more traditional 911.
Running on Michelin tyres though, as opposed to the Audi, which we know is running on Dunlops. Now admittedly they're both slick tyres, but it may well be that the temperature operating window of the Michelin just suits these damper conditions a little bit better. So here I am giving the credit to the Manthey driver, whether it's Kevin Estre or not, but I think he's going to be able to go through. Took advantage of that back mark of traffic, and great, it's got to be Kevin Estre, driving there by the Manthey Porsche, goes through into the lead of the race as they go out onto the Nordschleife. Yeah,
coming through the final chicane on the Grand Prix loop, Clio Cup car was in the way, and they went either side, the Audi taking the longer run and disadvantaging themselves, and went to driver's left, the Porsche going to driver's right, and the Porsche made the right choice. Manthey Racing, the 12 car, just heading out there as well after the auto close. Robert Renard and Mathieu Jaminet. A little bit of curb, too much curb taken as well by the Audi. Tried to get to the inside, going out onto the Hatzenbach, but I'm afraid job was done by then.
Absolutely. I don't think Stippler really made a choice. I think he kind of was on that line, going to the outside of the right-hander, and was then continuing on that line, avoiding the Clio. But then, as you say, it was left to the Manthey Porsche to be able to then make the choice. I think I can get up the inside here and steal the advantage. And then, as a result of the Audi bouncing over the curbs, it lost sufficient ground and lost momentum. So another change of lead, and so the Manthey Porsche goes for the first time actually into the lead of the race.
Yes, and Olaf will be telling his driver, you've got to the lead far too early. There's still 4 minutes 4 hours and 2 minutes to go. You only need to be leading over the line the last time. Let's not show our pace too early. Difficult conditions though, Paul, certainly on the first part of, well, on the Grand Prix loop and the first part of the Nürburgring, and there's no way I think that anyone's going to put a set of wet tyres on and risk them, because you still have to you do not want to do an extra pit stop, so you know, you've got to do your 7 or 8 laps.
No, it's absolutely the right thing to do, to stay on the slick tyres, even though it is just a little bit damp. But
the lap times have gone out to 8:40s and 8:45s.
But still with that yellow zone at the end of the Duttinger Hohe to impact things as well.
Good
so
point.
It's difficult to know exactly how much of the effect is weather and how much of the effect is down to yellow flags. But yes, lap times are just dropping away or increasing a little bit. Manthey having already won 3 of the VLN races this far, this is the 5th. The 4th one having been won by the road racing BMW.
Yes, this is the time when the gentleman in the Jetta will be loving it. Front-wheel drive, all over 18 stones in weight. They've got their own built-in traction control system there, and this will be a lot of fun in a Jetta.
And a lot of front-wheel drive.
Yeah, so that's great. Just pull it round. Great stuff.
It was the Falcon Motorsports BMW that won the VLN for, not the road racing one we spoke there.
There is a line on the circuit at various parts, including just beyond the Flugplatz. It's brightened up, but there's still yellow and red flags being waved, yellow and red striped flags being waved for difficult track conditions. That could mean debris on the track or slippery surface, or basically track conditions that aren't optimum. Still people attacking the run up towards the Flugplatz. At RSL_studio if you want to get in touch with us, as the rain continues to fall in the early part of the lap, and the 8 Haribo Mercedes around the outside of one of the BMWs going down towards Breitscheid, and the entrance to the circuit, the secondary entrance to the circuit. Now through to where Niki Lauda had his accident before heading up towards Bergwerk. Long uphill right-hander. See, right-hand indicator going on the KM, and then he went by there. Does that mean go past on the right, or does that mean I'm going to go right?
That means I'm going to go right.
Yeah, well, he didn't. And Audi SUV support vehicle heading up the hill through the the left-handers and heading up towards Kesselchen, and then up towards Klostertal. I love this climb uphill, even in a street car. You've got to be massively committed to get it right and keep your foot in, because it is much steeper there in real life than it looks on any of the simulations or even on the TV pictures. As Paul said earlier, every tiny little lift, 135 miles an hour through Kesselchen, even in a decent street car. The back end of the 993 gets a little bit interesting through there. It sort of loads up and then unloads itself and hops. But I was assured by Sabine Schmitz when I tackled her about that they all do that through there, don't they? Oh, really? Right, okay, thanks. A little bit of spray coming from the tyres of the cars as they come up and over the run through Kidebach Hohe and Flugplatz and up towards Swedenkreuz. Still that slow zone, which now must be for barrier repairs just beyond the bridge on the Dottinger Hohe. down towards Tiergarten.
No, it's another one. The Clio.
Oh, you are right.
But not quite. It's exactly the same place.
Is that a Clio, or is that the remains of the Golf, just looking at it from the front?
No, I don't think
and it hasn't got any further?
I thought
no, so it might be a Renault badge, you're right. Yeah, that's very difficult to spot.
I thought they had taken the Golf away. So the car's being slowed. This is just before the race leaders get there. There
is the race leader in the line of cars.
Lime green.
I think that's the Golf, Paul. That is the Golf. I can see the gold on the side now.
Yeah.
It's moved, but the front end is so badly deranged. I've got a feeling he's probably popped the left-hand drive shaft, and I think it won't now move under its own steam. And I'm not sure it'll be towed properly either. The Unimog track services vehicle, which there are a number, fantastic, those Mercedes-Benz 4x4 trucks. And that's pulling a trailer with some extra arm cord, and here comes the number 8 car through to that area of the track.
Yeah, that's number 8, the Haribo Mercedes, still in 4th place, around a minute behind the race leaders. But at least for Mercedes on, he is still ahead of the other Mercedes, the number 7 Black Falcon entered car of Hubert Hout, Manuel Metzger, and Adam Christodoulou. He's the third driver of the number 7 Black Falcon Mercedes, who's immediately behind the Haribo car, where the onboard shots are currently coming from.
Now let's just have a look to the left. There didn't seem to be too much problem with the left-hand side. Yeah, definitely the Golf. Definitely the Golf that has got no further. So under 4 hours to go now. We've had a third of the race. Porsche leading from the number 15 Phoenix Audi. Heading back out onto the Hatton back with rain still falling at that part of the circuit. And clearly the weather causing issues with the links on the track. We're not seeing quite as many cameras from further afield.
Just replaying in my mind what you just said, the Phoenix Audi is still leading from the 911 Porsche. It swapped round, didn't it? So it swapped back again. So
no, sorry. If I said that, it was still the Porsche leading from the Audi.
When it came across the line, the Audi is ahead of the Porsche across the line after 13 laps. So the change which happened as they went onto the Nordschleife changed back again. And the Phoenix Audi was leading as they crossed the line to complete 13 laps. So given that the timing screen is being a little bit recalcitrant.
Temperamental, yes.
It's when it does come up, it is showing us that the Phoenix Audi is leading from the Manthey Porsche in 2nd place. Then in 3rd place, we've got the number 4 Falcon Porsche. Then in 5th place is the Haribo Mercedes. In 6th place is the Black Falcon Mercedes. 8th and 7th, the 2 Mercedes, 4th and 5th. And in 6th place is the number 3 Falcon BMW.
That's not what the pictures were showing us then, for sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty certain that the Porsche was back ahead.
Right.
And I'm not entirely trusting the timing screen either, if I'm honest, because I think we're seeing an old version of that when it comes back. But I'll wait to get some visual evidence. What I can tell you is that the number 151 has ground to a halt on the Grand Prix circuit. And that very handsome looking BMW M4. That is the BMW M4 for Team Schirmer, Morant Gott and Stef van Kampenhout. So that is in the same category as the GT4 car with the Ian Wright driver, Torsten Druis, Dirk Eerdorf and Ricky Collard developing that number 999 car. This is the dark grey car with the very subtle Pirelli logo in slightly lighter grey on the side of it. And that car is without fire in its engine at the moment. As into the pit lane has come the number 3 BMW, the Falcon car, and the 8 Mercedes-Benz. Now, that is a more regular time for that car. I wonder if it's getting too wet, Paul, and they've gone on to wets. Because you told me he came in, oh no, that's 7. You said he came in at 7 and this is 14.
Yeah. So I just would have expected them to be able to go the extra lap because of the formation, of course, not included in the first 7. Yeah, so at the end of 14 laps, teams beginning to make their second pit stop.
Third run through the pits, of course, for the 8 car, one being a penalty for a pit stop that was too short. How can it be too short, you ask yourselves? Well, for each lap that you complete at racing speed, there is a table that says you have to spend a certain amount of time in the pit. So if you do 5 laps, there's a minimum pit stop reference time. 6 laps, there's a longer. 7 laps longer. 8 laps longer still.
What I didn't see on the screen was whether the Manthey Porsche came in for a pit stop as well.
Can't help you there, Paul, sorry. I didn't see it either.
No, so...
And, now I've got the timing back. And it does show the 911 is leading at the end of lap 14.
But has only made 1 pit stop. So
yes.
It leads the race, but owes us a pit stop. And the... I'll put the inverted commas in, problem for, or the disadvantage about going longer in this type of racing is that your pit stop at the end of doing the extra lap is a longer pit stop. So even though the Manthey car has stayed out for that extra lap, it may come back to bite them in, at least at the end of this stint, because their pit stop will have to be a little bit longer, which will mean that they then will have the disadvantage over the Haribo and the Phoenix cars, which, oh no, the Phoenix car didn't stop either.
No.
So in fact the first 3 is now Manthey Porsche, Phoenix Audi and Falcon Porsche, none of which made a pit stop on that last lap. The next 3 back, which is the Haribo Mercedes, the Falcon BMW and the Black Falcon Mercedes, all made pit stops on that last lap.
With the news from Johannes Gragliga that the TCR class teams are seemingly concerned over doing a full stint on their spec tyre. That's interesting. Now, if you're just joining us, as Chris Suku is, hello Chris, quick rundown of the major events of the first couple of hours or so. First lap was fairly fraught with the numbers 1 and 30 coming together very early on in the lap, indeed at the first corner, causing both of those cars to lose time. I don't think we've seen the 1 car back out again, actually, although the 30 car has come back out again. We also lost, whilst it was leading, the... Now, was it the 99?
Yes.
Yes.
Philip Eng.
Philip Eng driving the car. It's leading, the Ruhr Racing car, as I say, was leading in that M6 GT3, and that car, not sure it was an accident or a problem.
Well, we were told it had a collision.
Oh yes, that's right.
Only clue that it was not a problem.
But that car hasn't rejoined. We've seen the Land Audi with issues of a contact nature. Conor De Philippi got it back in, but it was retired.
Yes, it was already a lap behind. It's taken it a lap to get back, and then having looked at the damage, having already had an accident during testing yesterday, the Wolfgang Land decided that that car would now be retired from the race. Leaders on the Duttinger Hoa, and still, if it is Kevin Estre, the Manthey Porsche holding sway at the front, only by about 3 or 4 lengths from the Phoenix Audi behind it as they come into the yellow flag zone. Now, we came into the yellow flag zone side by side. That's a bit awkward. With a slower car, did the Phoenix Audi. So Frank Stippler is going to have to sort that one out. And those two cars, I suspect now, will both come into the pits, looking out for them to flash onto the left-hand side of our screen.
Yeah, and I should mention as well, Chris, and a bit of rain as well, which refuses enough, it would seem, to put wet tyres on, but is damp enough on the Grand Prix circuit, and at least the first part of the Nordschleife, probably up to the top of the hill at Arenberg, to make life, shall we say, interesting for drivers. A couple of accidents for cars further down the field, and most recently got one of the Golf TCR cars, which has destroyed itself pretty comprehensively at the front end, at least, coming down to the end of the Dottinger Höhe through Tiergarten, and that is why we have a slow zone there, as that car has steadfastly refused to be towed into the pit lane as well. Bit of barrier repair going on. We had a long barrier repair at Hohe Acht for a Porsche Cayman earlier on as well. But other than that, we're having a pretty good battle at the head of the field, with the top name drivers having taken the start, and very close indeed between the Porsche 911 and the 15 Audi at the front end of the field.
And a message coming up on the screen to say that the number 7 Black Falcon Mercedes, which was started by Hubert Haupt, whether Christodoulou or Manuel Metzger took it over, I don't know, but it's had an accident at Schwalbenschwanz. Now, it's not yet come through on our screens as completing 15 laps, which is what the leaders have already done, and we think have come into the pits already. But the screen telling us only at the moment the leaders have completed 14 laps, so waiting for them to come through at the end of the 15th lap. But that was the car, the Black Falcon Mercedes, that was in 6th place, had been up as high as 5th at one point, currently running in 6th, but looks to have a problem.
The other thing I should say for Chris and anyone else just joining us, we did have an SB7 car leading the race by dint of the fact it went so long. That was the 62 Gigaspeed Porsche GT America Cup car. Then when it came into the pits, it was leading SP7 at that point. It had a very, very long pit stop and dropped down into second positioning class, which has been taken by the 77 car, the Rent to Race Familia car. Christian Menzel is listed as one of the drivers there, and that car is in 9th position now, the 77 that is. That's another Porsche Cup car, and still leading SP7.